you do not know Ben, you should. He is from Janus, and he has worked in storage for a really long time. I think he was a manager at several storage facilities, and now is working, I guess, on the operations side with Janus. He's also a board member for the Louisiana Self-Storage Association, so he knows a lot about what our association needs to get out to our members, and I have heard great things about this presentation. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Ben.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. With me here.
All right, we have got your screen. You are ready to go.
All right. So today I'm going to talk about the importance of having a solid operations manual for your facility and what that means for your business. Just a little bit about me. I work with Janus International currently, as Shelley mentioned. For those of you who are not familiar with Janus, we are the #1 supplier for roll-up doors and hallway systems worldwide. We do new construction, as well as we have a program called R3, which stands for Restore, Rebuild, Replace, where we do door changeouts, we reconfigure unit mixes at facilities. And we also can take existing retail buildings and convert them into self-storage. Janus is also a pioneer in the smart entry systems, technology that allows you to streamline your touchless rentals by giving your tenants Bluetooth access to not only your gates and your man doors and elevators, but also to your individual storage units. A little bit about myself, as Shelley mentioned, I've been in the storage industry for a little over 13 years now, which is kind of hard to believe. I know what you're thinking. I did start when I was 10. So when I get to speak at conferences, one of the things I like to ask people is, by show of hands, how many people set out for a career in the self-storage industry? So far, nobody has ever raised their hand. So we all just kind of come into it. I got my start right out of college with a commercial mortgage brokerage. So I was financing income producing properties with a real specialty in the self-storage product. That company also owned a storage facility in Shreveport, Louisiana. I ran that facility for 11 years. During that time, I took it through a major expansion and redevelopment project. We were the first multi-story facility in Shreveport. So that whole experience, by starting with the mortgages and then getting into the operations, allowed me the unique opportunity to learn the business from the top side down, from analyzing financial statements and coordinating loan packages to really diving into the day-to-day operations and what does it take to successfully operate a facility. So today I'm going to cover the importance of an operations manual. We're going to talk about what is it, why do you need one, and how do you go about putting it together? So let's answer that first question. What is it? My friend Megan Smith at selfstoragecpa.com says that a well-written self-storage operations manual is a living roadmap for running your business. Well, guys, the thing about a roadmap is you need to know where you're going. So what is your end destination? And from there, you plot the points on your course on how to get there. So know your roadmap. Maybe it looks something like this. Maybe your plan is to purchase your first facility. You go through, you increase your occupancy and your rental rates to become profitable. Maybe you leverage that property or that profit and expand into other facilities. And maybe at some point you choose to liquidate. At that point, you've got a lot of options. You can start the whole process over and go back into development and acquisitions. Or you could retire to a life of luxury. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds kind of fun to me right now. Any chance in these times that we can get away would be great. But with that in mind, we're going to talk about why you need one. But let's kind of look at the inverse first. Just have a little fun. Why would you not need one, or who would not need one? So let's just start with this. If you like dealing with IRS audits, you probably don't need an operations manual. If you like a chaotic workspace, a constant barrage of phone calls from your manager asking questions, or just otherwise disorganized workspace, you probably don't need an operations manual. If you think that to wing it and pretend it's a plan is an actual plan, this is probably not for you. But I got to be honest, when I got started in this industry, the company that owned the facility I ran, they had no experience running a storage facility. They'd financed hundreds of facilities, but they never actually run one. So I had zero training, so this was a lot of trial by fire for me. I actually went through this process myself at that facility. I created an operations manual, figured out what best practices are. At that time, I was not plugged into the association. I wish I'd done so sooner, because everybody learns from mistakes, and you either learn from your mistakes or someone else's, and it's much less costly to learn from someone else's mistakes. So if you just wing it, you're throwing money down the drain. I don't like to waste time and money, so if it's not necessary, don't do it. How about this? If you like being sued and distributing large payouts for things like wrongful termination or wrongful sale of a lien unit, how about denial of entry into the facility, or secession of ownership? Guys, just a quick anecdote here. Not long into my foray into management at this storage facility, I was actually named in a lawsuit by a customer as the manager. They named the owners and the manager, myself, in this lawsuit. And that was kind of a scary deal for a young professional. The long and the short is a customer who was paying rent, or a gentleman had rented the unit. The unit was in his name, and his wife was using the unit and paying the bill. Well, the gentleman passed away suddenly and tragically, and his name was on the lease, and then suddenly a daughter from a previous marriage shows up in my office with a judgment, a right of secession judgment from a parish judge that said the contents of the unit belonged to the daughter. Well, obviously that made the current wife very unhappy. I denied her entry because, well, what am I going to do? A judge says the contents belong to someone else. So the lady who was paying the rent took us to court and sued us. And thankfully, because we had good practices in place, the lawsuit was thrown out within about 90 seconds. The judge looked and said, hey, your name's not on the lease, you have no claim. So it's important to make sure that you have procedures in place to avoid these, as well as any HR related questions and concerns. How about this? If you're in favor of corporate espionage, I thought this was a funny picture. It's important that as managers, that managers know what information is and is not okay to sell. People are coming in doing market studies all the time. You never know if it's a buyer or a potential competitor. But if your manager is giving away your critical information about occupancy and things of that nature, that could be a key indicator that could drive competition towards your facility that you don't necessarily want. So make sure that managers at the desk know what is and is not okay to share with outsiders. And then lastly, you probably don't need an operations manual if you're so cynical and ruthless that cute babies and puppies don't make you smile. And these are my babies, so there better be a lot of smiles out there in cyberland. Now, getting serious, why is it important to have an operations manual? Well, number one, standardized procedures. This makes it very easy for you to scale your business to operate multiple properties at the same time. It also allows you to easily substitute a manager in the office. And overall will make your operations more efficient. When it comes to easily substituting, I'm talking to both owners and managers out there, I know. Owners, if this next story describes you, don't be that owner. Empower your manager and help them out on this front. But I know as a small business owner, working for a small business owner, a family-owned operation, whenever I needed a day off or to take vacation, generally the owners of the facility would come in and they would be my substitute in the office. Well, that's all well and good, except they didn't know how to run their own business. So I would frequently come back to pages upon pages of notes of things that needed to be dealt with, customers that needed to be called, just because the substitute in the office didn't know how to deal with simple daily tasks. Now, an operations manual can be very helpful as a tool to guide that process, but it's only as good if you use it. So put it together and put it to good use. You're going to need one for legal protections. It's important to follow all legal procedures when it comes to your liens and foreclosures, having your employee agreement, your terms of employment, and employee termination. What are grounds for that? You need to have everything well documented. And when it comes to employee accountability, you have to properly set expectations if you ever want to give an evaluation. So set those expectations and then evaluate accordingly over time. So I'll ask a simple question moving on, just why are you in business? Did anyone ever get into the storage business because they felt bad for someone going through a life-changing situation? Maybe you're living in a subdivision, your neighbor Joe, he's been a good neighbor. He fed your dog while you're on vacation. He watches out for the house, but Joe fell on hard times. He lost his job and he's gonna have to downsize, and he needed a good place to store his treasures. So, maybe you were thinking, let me go invest $2, $3, $5 million into a storage facility so I can make sure that Joe gets a good deal on storage. No, nobody ever said that. You're in business for one reason. As my friend Mr. Wonderful says, money. Big fan of Shark Tank. Mr. Wonderful happens to be one of my favorite sharks. Don't judge me. But if you're in business to make money, well, it's important to know how money is made. So this is what's called the cash flow quadrant. It was developed by a gentleman named Robert Kiyosaki, who has written a couple of books that I would recommend to everyone, whether you're an owner or manager. I think these are critical to your personal finance as well as your business. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the cash flow quadrant. This is the cash flow quadrant. Basically, it states the idea that there are 4 ways to make money. On the left-hand side, there's 2 options. That's what we call active income, and you're either an employee or you're self-employed. You own your job, and that's active income. You're trading your time for someone else's money. Well, I think for most of us, the goal is to transition over to the right side, where you're either a business owner or an investor. As an investor, your money works for you. You're relatively passive. You just put your money into a business and you get a return. In storage, you're a business owner if you treat it as such. And you own a business system where you're able to duplicate your personal efforts through the benefit of employees. So in order to properly duplicate this, manual is critical. So let's look a little deeper as an example of a business system. I think McDonald's is probably one of the most popular examples of a business system. And I always pose the question, is McDonald's profitable because they make a good burger or because, or another reason? Obviously, any one of us on this webinar can make a better burger than McDonald's. But what they've developed is a consistent practice where you can walk into a McDonald's anywhere in the world and you know exactly what you're going to get, and that allows them to duplicate themselves time and time again. They even have a place called Hamburger University up in Chicago where they train their managers. So they're all into the business system and the operations manual. So moving on to the third phase is, how do you make one? Well, step 1, as an owner, engage your store manager. If you're a manager, engage your owner. Let them know, hey, I want to make your operations better. I'm working on this. I would like your feedback and input. Work together as a team. Ask each other questions. Document your daily tasks and be very detailed. So it's important, I've heard some people say that the very first thing in their operations manual when they come in the office is to turn on the light. It's a very simple thing. It's not to be patronizing to the person who's running the office that day. But we've all been in a scenario where you show up a couple minutes before opening, and there's a line of people waiting to pay their bills, and it's really easy to go straight back behind the desk and get to work, and then you look up and realize everybody's standing in the dark. I'm guilty of that. That happened in my office. So be very detailed about what you do on a daily basis. Lastly, I might recommend a little bit of caffeine to keep things on the level and keep your focus. Wash, rinse, repeat. Guys, this is a try, fail, and adjust process. Remember, this is your operations manual is a living roadmap, so it's going to constantly evolve, and we have to make changes as times change. As Marla mentioned earlier, we're operating in the middle of the COVID crisis very differently than we were just 45 days, maybe even 30 days ago in some cases. So we have to update our procedures accordingly. Constantly reevaluate. In college, I don't remember a lot about my classes, to be quite honest with you. But from my capstone course in business school, one of the case studies that stuck out to me the most basically stated that most businesses fail for one reason, and that's because they fail to reevaluate their strategy on how they're doing things. So make sure that you're changing with the market, preferably ahead of the market as opposed to behind the market. But regardless, make sure you're changing with the times, how you operate. So during the creation, I encourage you to streamline your process. You're making notes, you're looking at things that you're doing. Some things may not be sent or make a lot of sense or may not be very efficient in how they're currently being done. This was a great scene from the movie The Founder, once again about McDonald's and how that company came to be what it is today. So early on, the McDonald brothers out in California were trying to streamline their process. You know, the typical drive-in burger joint would take up to 15 minutes to get your food. Well, they thought that's silly. There's got to be a better way. So they actually took all of their employees, they closed down shop for the day. They went to a local tennis court, took some chalk. They had a ladder where they could climb up and observe what was going on in their operation. So they sketched out their entire kitchen to scale. And they had their employees mimicking what their tasks are, like doing physical walkthroughs. And what happens was when someone was taking a tray of buns from one counter to the next to put everything together, people were crashing into each other. So things weren't working. So they would look at it from a bird's eye view. They would tweak it and reevaluate. And finally, they found the most efficient path for them to deliver their burgers to their customers. So here we're going to jump into what to include. By no means is this an all-inclusive list. Hopefully, more than anything, it's a brainstorming session to get you really thinking about what happens on a day-to-day basis in your office, because there are a lot of tasks. It may not seem like it on the outside, but once you start drilling in, there are a lot of things that happen in a day-to-day basis. So the best place to start, I would say, is in the beginning. How do you open up your store in the mornings? What software programs need to be open on your computer? Are you running SiteLink, PTI, Outlook for email? All of those things need to be open so you can operate efficiently throughout the day. What is the process for taking payments, move-ins, move-outs? So there's a lot of great management software platforms out there today. When we got started with the new platform 10 years ago, the software was great. It was pretty user-friendly. However, the one downside was they didn't have a manual on how to complete their simple daily tasks. So I actually included this in my manual. I took screenshots. This is the payments button. This is where you find it. This is where you click. This is where you enter the payment type, whether it's a cash, check, or card, the check number. This is how you generate the receipt. So go through all of these steps in detail. There's a lot that happens in the process of taking a payment. Same with doing move-ins and move-outs. Are you doing touchless rentals? Are you doing e-sign in your office and saving things electronically? Are you still printing stuff out and using paper copies? Auto pay. It's easy to set up auto pay during the move-in process. But what are your procedures for updating when someone calls in and has a new card change? Do you get written authorization? How's that written authorization stored? Is it electronic? Is it a paper file? Tenant transfers, all the things that go in with that. Your daily walkthrough, your cleaning tasks and things of that nature when you're checking your logs and checking the facility. How often do you do it? Do you have a checklist of things to accomplish while you're out on the property? And then your daily close, making sure that all your cash and your checks match what's in your management software, reconciling your credit card payments, putting that deposit together, all of those things. There's a lot of detail that can go into this. Your phone etiquette is a high priority. What is your sales procedure? Is there a script for your managers to use? One of the neat things that we did, we had a script for our sales procedure, and we could print it out. It had these blanks in it that we would fill in for each person. So we would just take that, we would slip it in a vinyl page protector and use a dry erase marker as we're going through the phone call. We would fill in the blanks, and then we'd get all that put into the computer. And then at the end of the call, we wipe it and it's ready for the next call. So there's a lot of little tricks that you can use. How do you handle your collection calls? When are they made? Do you have a script for your collection calls? Are you using text messaging for your collection calls? If you're not, I highly, based on my experience, highly recommend that you use text messages as collection notifications. Frequently, people don't answer their phone, right? It doesn't matter who it is. A lot of people just don't want to answer the phone. They don't want to talk on the phone, but they will respond to a text message. The first day we issued text notifications for delinquent tenants, I had about 15 phone calls, people calling me back to take care of their bill within a 5-minute period of time. Have all of that laid out in detail, your procedures. Your lien procedures, do you have your state procedures and protocols in place? Are they easy to follow and easy to understand? Do you know who your auction provider is? You'll hear from storageauctions.com later today. I used them and had fantastic results. How do you deal with the death and succession of a tenant? As mentioned earlier in the case of that lawsuit, that's something that we learned is a pretty critical piece of operations. It's not a pleasant part of business. However, it is critical. I mean, every one of us at some point is going to have a customer who passes away, and you have to have your managers need to be empowered to know how to deal with those situations in advance. What to include? Procedures for your rate management. How often do you review your standard rates? How are you using push rates within your management software system? And how do you deal with rate increases for existing tenants? Now, this is the part of the show where in a live audience, all of the air gets sucked out of the room because people are generally terrified before they first do their rate increases on existing customers. Now more than ever, though, it's critical that you know your market when you're walking in to rate increases. And I'm going to deviate for just a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about this to kind of set you at ease. Obviously, with what's happening in the market today with COVID, know your market. Rates are softening, so now is probably not the best time to do rate increases. But here are some ideas of things, strategies to implement rate increases once things begin to get back to normal. Now, the first question people always ask is, won't everybody move out if they're getting a rate increase? And statistics say that no, realistically, less than 2% of people are going to move out. And it's really because of the fact that they're getting an increase at all as opposed to the amount of the increase. Increases need to be consistent and fair. There are no special customers. Don't pick and choose who gets them. You may give considerations to tenants who have multiple units. Maybe you're out of 10 by 20s and you rented 2 10 by 10s at the same rate as a 10 by 20. So maybe that customer gets consideration to be consistent with their unit type. Take personality and favoritism out of the process. Make sure that you survey your competition, know what's happening. Increase your existing tenant rates annually and don't raise them on recently moved in tenants. So at my facility, my tenants got their first rate increase at 12 months and then every 9 months after that. They would generally get a 5 to 7% increase. And I use a percentage approach as opposed to a dollar amount because a $5 rate increase on a $25 unit is 20%, whereas a $5 increase on a $100 unit is 5%. So just make a flat, fair percentage increase across the board. Make sure that the increases are regular and modest so people know what to expect and they can pay them. And then lastly, collect the rent. You know, my parents had a rule when I was growing up, back when we still had landlines coming into our house. where if someone called and asked to talk to me or one of my sisters and we didn't want to talk to them, we would just signal to my mom and she would yell, Ben, get off the phone. So, oh, sorry, I got to go. I can't talk right now. So that way I'm not the bad guy. Well, guess what? As managers and owners, I encourage you to empower your managers with this, to take all the pressure off of them. It's not them it's not the manager that's giving the increase. It's the ownership. It is a business. Your business expenses are rising. So allow your customers to just push it back on you. It allows them to keep a personal relationship with the tenants. And, the customers understand, hey, I get it. You're just trying to keep your job. Everybody's got to do what they got to do. So take that pressure off of the managers in the office. So getting back to what to include, there are certain monthly events, your inventory schedule. How often do you track the inventory in your office and reorder? Who do you reorder from? Are you updating? Who is updating your prices? Hopefully, as your cost for products, your cost of goods sold increases, you're increasing your sale price as well to keep those margins. So there's a lot of detail that goes into that. Your maintenance schedules, like your HVAC and pest control. One thing I recommend when it comes to these types of things, your HVAC, your plumber, electrician, your door and gate repair, have a depth chart. Have your top 3 choices for vendors so that obviously stuff happens and not at the most convenient times. When a door spring breaks, not on a Janus door, but when door springs break, it's always at 5 o'clock when you're getting ready to close and you got to get someone out there to fix an occupied unit. So not everybody's going to be available. Your first pick's not going to be available all the time. Your second pick's not going to be available all the time. So have a good depth chart so that you can take care of those issues in a timely manner. Banking, who orders your deposit slips and your check stamps, who makes the deposits, when are the deposits made, how often are deposits made. There's a lot that goes into these things. And then your print and marketing material, who are your vendors for that, for your preferred choice. Corporate information, contacts, owner contacts. If you're a third-party management company, who are the supervisors? Corporate forms, as far as employee forms that have to be filled out if you have time off requests, or payroll, or even down to your lease and your tenant forms that are required at a corporate level. W-9s. At the end of every year, we get a lot of letters from customers who need a W-9 for their taxes. Have that saved on the manager's desktop so they can fire it over and they're not sending you a bunch of requests at the end of every year. There's nothing sensitive in that. Access codes and appropriate passcodes, have them saved in a secure location so they can be retrieved and easily found. Employee expectations. What is the code of conduct for your employees? What is your dress code? Do your employees easily understand the benefits that you provide and how to access those benefits? What are your holidays? When do you close? How much vacation do they get? How do they request that vacation? What are your payroll procedures? Property expenses like invoices that come into the property. Do those need to be emailed to you, to an accountant? Do those need to be saved electronically on a server, on a hard drive? Do you keep paper copies in the office? Where are those paper copies kept? Credit card or petty cash expenses, how are those reimbursed? Who tracks the expenses? Where do all of those receipts need to be delivered to make sure it's properly tracked? Does your manager requisition a petty cash reimbursement if you are using petty cash in your office? Hours of operation, make sure that those are clear for your facility, for your managers, especially if you have multiple facilities. I know some people will have all their facilities operate on the same hours. I tend to lean towards the idea that every facility is an individual animal. It's very unique. So your office hours may vary from property to property, but if you have managers that are moving around and subbing in at various properties, make sure that all of your property hours are listed. So either they know when they need to be at work if they're moving to another property, or if they need to contact another manager with a question, they can access that easily. Who is the after hours contact for your facility if there's a situation? What does your file system look like? Do you still keep physical files or is it electronic files? One thing I recommend, especially as you're scaling, this becomes critical because you should be able to walk into any one of your stores and find a file that you need, whether it's an electronic file on the computer locally stored or whether it's a physical file. Your filing system needs to be uniform across all facilities. Emergency procedures. Who would have thought that we would be dealing with pandemic preparation? So make sure that your employees and your customers both feel safe in the office in doing day-to-day business. Make sure they feel safe when it comes to protocols if there is a robbery. How are they to respond? If there's a break-in at the facility, who files the police reports and notifies the tenants? If there's property damage due to acts of nature, how is that handled? And if something happens and your facility is contacted by the media, who is the media spokesperson? You don't want just anyone talking to the media and answering questions that could be twisted around. And on that note, how do you respond to the media? Do you do it in person, over a phone call, or do you issue a written statement only? And I think I'm about to run out of time and almost done. Lastly, consider for your spouse or your business partner, do they have access to all the business records, bank and mortgage information, insurance, passwords, and will and succession? Are all these things in place so if something tragic happens to you, that the business can carry on seamlessly? This is really critical. I know several people in the industry who have faced with this in recent years. Some had things well in place and it was a very smooth transition and business never missed a beat. Others, not so much. I have a friend who passed away. He owned 7 stores in Shreveport, and their company couldn't write checks for almost 18 months because things weren't in as good of order as they should be. So make sure that things are well taken care of for your loved ones and partners. Some additional resources. I quoted Megan Smith at Self Storage CPA. Visit her website. Bob Copper at Self Storage 101 has a lot of resources about operations manual as well as inside self-storage. There are resources you can purchase there, and I recommend using those as a foundational tool only, but still going through the process of developing it for your unique business and how that works for you. Lastly, feel free to contact me with any questions beyond just what Janus does. I'm happy to answer any questions about operations and share some experience there. But of course, I'm there to take care of your needs as your door and hallway representative and conversion representative for Janus International. So with that, Shelly, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you once again for allowing me to share.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. That was a lot of good information. We had several questions come in from some members during that. And you have maybe 1 minute to answer. I got one specific.
Absolutely.
From Jennifer Schilling. She's asking, how often do facilities typically do a rate increase?
So again, I recommend in normal economic circumstances, this is a little bit of an anomaly right now. So I would think overall the market is not doing rate increases during COVID, but every customer should get a rate increase at least once a year on a normal basis. And under normal circumstances. So that will be staggered throughout the year based on your customer's move-in time. So that way you're not doing 300 rate increases at once. But when it comes to managing your street rates, your new rental rates, those need to be evaluated on a weekly, if not daily basis based on what's trending in the market. So that is when a tenant comes in off the street or potential tenant comes in off the street, what will they pay to rent that 10 by 10 unit? That needs to be somewhat fluid based on what's happening in the market around you. Just always stay aware. Okay,
good deal. We had a few other members ask if Missouri offers a kind of a manual to get started on your own operations manual, and I will get with the board on that at our next meeting, and we'll see if we can get something together as far as the template goes. I know there's a lot of resources on the SSA website, and like Ben was saying, with through Bob Copper and Inside Self Storage, but specifically for Missouri, we can definitely look at that. So anyway, thank you, Ben, cute kids, and thanks for all the entertaining slides. And I will get any other questions that come up to you over to you later today.
All right. Thanks, Shelley.